the Spotrac Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Today's edition of the Spotrac Podcast is presented by Authentic Audio Productions. Take the pain out of starting and keeping your podcast going. It's a one-stop shop with professional tools, professional people, content creation, a host, if that's something that you need. You probably do. To elevate your podcast and take everything you're doing to the next level, visit AuthenticAudioPro.com. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Monday, October 28th, Week 8, almost entirely in the books. Sans Pittsburgh v. New York Giants. Yikes. Monday Night Football. Pittsburgh's certainly in the mix. The Giants are slipping out of the mix, and it seems like Daniel Jones will remain the starting quarterback. We'll see how long. I have a feeling it's going to be a short leash again in Week 8, and maybe for the rest of the regular season, as we detailed last week on this podcast with that injury guarantee really starting to get at least somewhat troublesome for 2025 if the plan is to flip this roster, even though owner John Mara has come out and said that Brian Daboll and Joe Shane, to name a few, are safe for 2025. We'll see. I believe the term "for now" was thrown in there, or at this point. And generally that's rich guy speak for, I can make this move anytime I want. I'm just not saying I'm doing it right now. So we'll see. It's a long way to go for the Giants, who, along with their New Jersey compartments, the Jets are sliding backwards, not forwards, about halfway through this regular season. Here's the plan today. I've got an NFL trade piece posted. I'm going to detail that as much as possible without too many numbers. And then a little baseball, because the World Series is quickly evaporating before our eyes. The Dodgers have put their flag into the ground. Let's put it that way. And we'll see what happens in New York starting tonight. But for now, we have anticipated the end of this Major League Baseball season to happen sometime middle to end of this week, certainly through the weekend if this thing goes the distance. But we're ready, and we'll get to what we have done, what we have coming, and some of the greatest hits that we're going to have to focus on at the back end of this show. Let's talk trades. We've had a few big ones, a few notable ones. I'm going to talk a little bit about Davante Adams because, look, if this works, none of us are talking. None of us are saying a thing except for it was an aggressive move and it appears to be working out. And the Jets are like 3 bounces and 2 bad throws away from all of this coming, to fruition. They're probably a 500 team. You're talking about them being right there with the Bills, which is pretty much where we thought they'd be, right? I wasn't one of those people that bet this team to win the AFC East and have real Super Bowl hopes. That wasn't where I had this team, even though I think that was a rather sexy pick around the league. They're 2-6 now. They could be 4-4. They could be 3-5. They're not. They're 2-6. And differential speaking, they're down at the bottom of this thing. Certainly the head-to-head, the Patriots have now jumped them. So the Jets are dead last in this AFC East after acquiring a wide receiver that certainly made sense on paper, but paper's the discussion here. Okay, this isn't the less than $1 million rental that Amari Cooper is going to be for the Bills. This isn't the $1 or $2 million rental that DeAndre Hopkins winds up being for the Kansas City Chiefs after retained salary, because the Jets did this deal without having the Raiders pay $1 of it. All right. They wanted to preserve their top 100 draft pick. They wanted to make this move, having to pay cash and only cash to get the most out of Davante Adams. Is this going to be the best decision in the end? Clearly not from a football standpoint. But what about the business side of it? I want to put some rational thinking into this move heading towards Week 9, knowing where things are probably ending up, which is a big discussion, right? A discussion about Rodgers retiring, and if not, what the hell do the Jets do? Because there's a non-guaranteed, basically $35 million, $38 million salary for Aaron Rodgers built into a roster bonus an option bonus that needs to be extended at some point in time next year. Or they kick this guy to the curb. Literally. Take on $50 million of dead cap because of these bonuses that have prorated. And then what? Right? They're certainly not going Sam Darnold again, I wouldn't think. So are they going back to the draft with this draft capital that we're talking about here per the Adams move and taking a flyer on one of these quarterbacks that aren't slam dunks, right? We don't have a number one overall pick quarterback in this draft, at least not yet. There's still time for the mockers to change their minds, but it doesn't appear that we have a slam dunk for Carolina or for Tennessee or for the Jets to take. And those are the candidates right now at the top 5. New England's out. I would think Jacksonville's out. So those are the 3 teams that we're talking about here for the top quarterback. It's not a great outlook for the Jets. And Rodgers is a big reason why they're in this mess. And he's going to be the face of the big reason that they have questions in March, maybe even in February if they have to get ahead of this thing. It's fascinating. All right. And Rodgers is the elephant in the room. He kind of always is wherever he goes. But now it's because he's not holding up his end of the bargain. And that could mean a bit of a mess here. So what did they give up for Davante Adams? We kind of gloss over that because we talk about the $11 million they took on, because we're talking about how good of a value Amari Cooper is going to be, even if he's the 3rd or 4th option in that Buffalo offense, which he very well could be, certainly after a couple of weeks. They gave up a 3rd that could be a 2nd. Adams has to be an all-pro. The Jets need to make it to the AFC Championship game. Neither of those things appears to be in order. Which means that the Jets will have given up pick 72 as of right now. That's how we have things kind of projected. Pick 72 for 11 weeks of Davante Adams. There's worse scenarios out there, right? Except this. It's pick 72 plus 11 million. And that's what stings. That's what I don't understand. Were there really 6 teams in on Davante Adams to the point of where the Raiders not having to retain salary plus a 3rd round pick was the cost? It seems absolutely asinine to me. And Adams is a game changer, but he's not an every game changer right now, not at his stage of his career. So I'm not crapping on the Jets because of their loss to the Patriots. I'm not even crapping on the Jets because they've been aggressive, because I give them credit for it. They've been in purgatory for a while here. They've missed on quarterbacks. They've missed on coaches to properly develop quarterbacks. And they just kind of try to take somebody else's dessert and make it their entree, right? That's what they've done here with this Packers situation. There are worse attempts out there. There certainly are. But to compound it with the Adams move is going to be salt on the wound. And that's unfortunate. And look, here's the real reason that I'm bringing this up at the top of the show. These are the moves we want the NFL to be making. We want teams to be this aggressive in season. It makes the league better. It makes the league more transactional, and it leads to bigger trades in the off seasons, which we've had a nice run of. You know, we've had starting quarterbacks move each of the last couple of seasons here. Let's keep that train going. I really want the NFL trade deadline to have juice. And for the most part, it is a massive letdown. Well, we've had 3 starting wide receivers go. One of them's a disaster already, at least in terms of how the team is going to end up. And 2 appear to be factors on contending teams, on maybe 2 of the best 4 teams in football in Buffalo and Kansas City. So who's left? Who else is out there with legitimacy? Because, man, we've got a list of 100, right? That's growing and growing and growing by the Twitter sphere. But what are the real players in terms of how it looks from a football standpoint, from a standing standpoint, and from a contract standpoint, the part that a lot of these hot stovers leave out, which is maybe the most important part. It's what makes the Davante trade so weird, and what makes the Cooper trade, in essence, brilliant for Buffalo at the end of the day, when you're looking at one hand feeds the other. Let's start with some quarterbacks. The least likely position to move mid-season for a lot of reasons, barring some ridiculous injury. And by the way, Green Bay might have that injury. I don't think either of these players are candidates to take over, quite frankly, because Malik Willis is holding his own as a fill-in-the-blank guy for Green Bay right now. And the only people that saw that coming were the Green Bay front office, who acquired this guy cut every other player, every other quarterback on this roster or practice squad, and said, this is our backup quarterback, and must have done God's work behind the scenes, because he is game ready every time he's been asked to go out there and fill in for Jordan Love. And now it seems like week 9 going forward, it's going to be Malik Willis's job again as Love nurses this groin injury. The two guys I have pegged are on the same roster. So I've got the number 2 and number 3 quarterback from the Denver Broncos, Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham. This is an either or scenario. And one is markedly more expensive and has markedly less playing time as a starting quarterback. That would be Stidham, who costs about $2.5 million at the deadline, over Wilson, whose expiring contract costs about $528,000. I know we've seen a lot of bad out of Wilson. We've seen some decent stability out of Stidham as a backup quarterback. But that's what this is, right? You're looking for a team that maybe doesn't like their QB2 situation right now. Or a contending team that wants to take advantage of this third quarterback role, especially in the postseason, and just wants to shelve a Zach Wilson who has game experience on their roster so that they can utilize him as needed and certainly have the injury protection as needed down the stretch as well. I think Wilson has a real good chance of moving here. I really do. And by the way, if that's the case, it's a pretty nice move by Denver to keep him as a third option on the active roster for these 9 or 10 weeks, because they're probably going to get themselves a 6th-round pick out of this. And that's not for nothing. You know, when you're a team like this who is purging this year from a dead cap perspective and a roster perspective, but also adding, extending, and now to some degree competing in their current division. So they're doing it all at once. It's something that's really, really hard to do in all major professional sports, but Denver's pulling it off at least for half the season. You pick yourself up an extra 6th-round pick. You turn 2 or 3 of those 6th-round picks into a 5th-round pick on draft day when you're moving up. So it's not the worst idea in the world, and it might come to fruition here if there's a team out there that doesn't love their backup situation. I think Stidham's just too expensive for that conversation. You know, now is Denver going to pay $1.5 million off of that to make him? I just don't know if he's got the juice, right? And I know Wilson's got a lot of bad juju with him, but there's some good there. There's some good there. Even with somebody like Aaron Rodgers, who had to sit with a clipboard and watch him last year, there's some things being said there that you can build off of on a really weird Jets roster in 2023. Running backs, there were a few, and the guy I picked is somewhat expensive, but Carolina's got to get rid of Miles Sanders. To me, it just has to happen. It just has to happen. One of these contending teams has to look around the room and say, we need to do better than this. You know, it could even be a fringe team like Dallas, who we've been talking about the running back room or lack thereof for I don't know, 6 months now. And they threw Dalvin Cook out there to the Wolves, and it didn't go well against San Francisco. This is a player that at the deadline has $2 million guaranteed remaining. Could you get Carolina to pay the $1 million? Probably. Why? Just do it, right? Just do it, Carolina. Are you giving up more than a 6th-round pick? Probably not. Now, look, there's term on this contract. There's 3 years left. 2 this year, 6-7 next year, 5-5 in 2026. None of that's guaranteed. So you can look at it as a $1 million rental, or you can look at it as we bring him in as a $1 million rental. And if this guy can stick in this offense, he's under term, right? We asked him to take a pay cut down to $4 million next year as an RB2. And we've got a running back for this and next year. And maybe that only cost us a 6th-round pick. Conditional to 5th or something like that based on attempts or something. But that's the outlook for this player, a player that was an RB1 for 3-4 seasons and just completely fell off the train when he joined Carolina and has now been usurped by both Chuba Hubbard and I would assume Jonathan Brooks when he returns. Now he's yet to hit the field in the NFL, but all intentions, including why they drafted him, was to take over this role eventually. Why not right away? What else does Carolina have to lose? So he's a player that needs to go from a roster construction standpoint. And I have to imagine with a little bit of retained salary that can get done. Speaking of which, wide receiver Mike Williams, brought in to be the number 2 behind Garrett Wilson. That was the plan. Aaron Rodgers throws to Mike Williams and Garrett Wilson primarily. Allen Lazard is certainly that third option. And a couple of the tight ends generally fall in favor with Rodgers as things go along. That's just how his career has gone. Well, There's been public discourse between quarterback and Mike Williams. There's been discontent with the whole offensive scheme with Mike Williams. We know he's injury prone. There's just a lot of bad going on with him in terms of that organization. And because of the way they handled his contract, which was incentive based to start, but also they converted almost all of his salary into signing bonus here. He's in that Amari Cooper world, right? So he's got an almost minimum salary remaining, and that comes down to about $698,000 at the deadline. That's the kind of move teams love to make, right? Let's wait another week. Let's see what happens. We know the Jets are now selling whatever they can sell. You have to imagine at 2-6, it's, all hands are off here. Teams will be calling for Mike Williams. Tampa Bay should be calling for Mike Williams. Pittsburgh should be calling for Mike Williams, etc. And at that price, we're in the Cooper conversation, not nearly what Devontae or Cooper Kupp were going to cost. Speaking of which, Treylon Burks, it's just not a thing, right? And unfortunately, we haven't really found an offensive player that has worked with this Titans system for the better part of 5 years now. Not since Tannehill was in his heyday for a minute there. So, you're seeing Malik Willis go and be successful. You're seeing DeAndre Hopkins, I imagine, have a nice stretch here with Kansas City to finish off 2024. Well, Treylon's never been part of this offense. There's been injury stuff. There's been a whole mess of reasons to keep him off the field. Is he the next version of Kadarius Toney? He's got, $783,000 left this year. It's guaranteed. All of his 2.6 next year is fully guaranteed. He's a first-round pick. And then he's got that 5th-year option to decide on next May. At this point, there's no chance that's being exercised. But that's one other reason to bring him in. Bring him in, let him play for 9 weeks, see what the hell you have. It's a low risk, right? 2.6 next year is a low risk. And oh, by the way, if it's working, maybe you got this guy for 2.5 years. If you find a reason to exercise the 5th-year option and keep him under team control. Pittsburgh, right? Same teams, exact same teams. Pittsburgh. To some degree, Tampa, although I think they're thinking more immediate than long term, and the list goes on. There's injuries out there, right? DK Metcalf, etc. Brandon Ayuk, etc. It's a good reason to have depth, see what you can do, see what kind of player he is, and then if you have to throw him to the wolves next year, you can do it. But we almost saw it kind of work with Kadarius Toney. He had some moments in Kansas City. Now you need the right organization. But I do think there's organizations out there that would look at this as value and flip something late to the Tennessee to get them off their books. Deontay Johnson, speaking of Carolina Panthers, he's been talked about quite a bit. He's one of the more expensive options here. He's $3.5 million. So if you're going to retain salary on Miles Sanders, you might as well retain salary on Deontay Johnson and make it a 1-2 punch for a contending team looking to add depth. He's a nice player. He's had some locker room struggles. I think that's one of the big reasons he was taken out of Pittsburgh's fold this past February. But, he's shown flashes on a really bad Carolina team. He can show flashes on a better team for the next 10 weeks before he hits free agency in 2025. A couple of defensive players and we'll get out of here. I mentioned Budda Baker last time I talked about this. It's a $7 million salary at the deadline. That's way, way more than teams want to actually pay for safeties for a full year. So I'm gonna guess that Arizona is not in the business of retaining salaries right now. They're in the business of trying to win and stay relevant in that division. So he's a loose candidate at this point in time. But how about these names? How about Josh Uche from the Patriots, despite them having a nice, kind of ridiculous win in New York? It's less than $900,000 to rent him for the rest of the year. He took basically a showcase contract to stay in New England. I'm not sure what his plan was there. He had multi-year offers. He had big-time guarantees, and he decided to stay in New England for one reason or another. Less than $900,000 for a guy that can get to the quarterback who's good in coverage. And I think, if you like him, would be worth an extension with wherever he ends up. This feels like the move the Detroit Lions should make as a placeholder for Aiden Hutchinson. It's not the same kind of player, right? This is more of a true edge guy. So you'd have to make some adjustments, and maybe it's just not the best fit. But for a team looking to replace sacks and pressures, this guy's in that conversation. And at that price, holy cow. Speaking of which, all right, I know the Chargers got a weird win yesterday. That was ugly against the Saints, and they're going to have a lot of those. But if any point in time they want to be the Denver Broncos and try to do everything all at once, and I think they should be, because I think what Harbaugh and that group should realize is, okay, the group as it currently exists is never going to project to the next level. We're not going to get there. So it's going to take a big offseason, maybe 2 big off seasons, to really become the organization that we want to be, that we feel comfortable coaching to success. If that's the case, I don't believe, despite the production and really not slowing down one bit, that 33-and-a-half-year-old Khalil Mack is in their plans. Okay, he took a pay cut to stick. He's still going to be a free agent next March. You can certainly let him run his course and walk into free agency and hope you get a decent comp pick back for him. But if you can get that comp pick right now, because he only has $628,000 left on this contract as of next week at the deadline, that's a dream scenario for a player that has been plug and play everywhere he's gone, with the Raiders, with the Bears, and with the Chargers. Minimal decline for a player of this age at this position. You just don't see it. He is in unicorn status at this point. If I'm the 49ers, if I'm the Lions, if I'm any of these teams, hell, even Buffalo, the place where he went to college, this is the right price. This is the right price for quarterback pressures. Now, Buffalo has Von Miller coming back. You know, there are teams for this. And I don't know if the Chargers are willing to go to this degree of both buying, selling, and trying to compete. But that's the name. And that's a name I'm not hearing. That's a name that I'm looking at the contract. I'm looking at next March. I'm starting to formulate my roster bubble stuff. And I could see that being the big Adam Schefter bomb on November 5th. So it's priced right, but certainly the Chargers have to pick up the phone. Couple more. Calais Campbell, kind of lost with the Dolphins here a little bit. That was a late signing, June 18th, $2 million plus incentives. He's on a minimum salary now. You know, half of that was signing bonus. He's got production. All right. PFF has always loved this guy. So if you're looking at that grade, that's a bit inflated for what he's actually done on the field, but he is making an impact despite the simple salary and a bit of a depth position that he's been playing in. $605,000 left at the deadline. He's 38 years old, by the way. I can't not say that, but certainly he has been through it all. So this is the ultimate tack on to a contending team player at a position where you probably need 4 to 5 to 6 guys heading down the stretch towards Thanksgiving and then some. So just another name I'm not seeing, but contractually speaking, and where Miami might be headed, even though, you know, the return of Tua could change some things, I would imagine that the front office in Miami is at least listening to players like this, that not going to bring back a ton in terms of assets, but probably the right move for the player as well. Okay, let's talk baseball. By the way, I'll keep this updated as long as I'm hearing legitimate options to add to this. I had Christian Kirk on this list, by the way. That fell off because of his, I think, season-ending injury this past weekend. So it's going to be fluid. That's just the nature of the league. If I hear 3 to 4 more names, I will add to this list, and you'll be hearing from me again before the November 5th deadline. So we'll talk about it then. But for now, that's kind of our rock steady list. I know I left off the Adam Thielens and a few other players that are really getting tossed out there quite a bit. I'm just not there with some of these guys. I mean, to some degree, it's got to be a guy that can actually produce immediately. You know what I mean? Especially if it's a rental situation, and most of these are. You're not going to have multi-year terms, you know, like the Traylon Burks in these kind of mid-season moves. But if anything pops up, you know, if Michael Penix becomes an actual trade option, which seems impossible to me, but if we get there, we get there. Like I said, I'll keep you posted and I'll keep it fluid. Baseball. Well, we're 2 games away from the Dodgers finishing this thing off. So I'm not yet going to dive into the offseason stuff, but we have on Spotrac.com. So I've started about a week and a half ago. I posted the options piece, that's how it all starts. I spoke this morning with cousin Dan, who really handles the bulk of our MLB data. The first order of business becomes the options. It's like 5 days after the end of the World Series. Whenever that happens, teams have to get all their option decisions in order. And there's quite a few. And some are player opt-outs, early terminations, certainly a bunch of player options, plenty of club options, and a couple of mutuals that generally get thrown away by one side or the other. So we've detailed every single one of those in a piece on Spotrac.com. We have predicted outcomes within the team pages for 2025. So if we believe that Frankie Montas is not going to take his option with the Brewers, he will not be a part of their 40-man roster projection for 2025 until he exercises that and actually hits that 40-man roster. So we've taken some early moves to kind of project things out as much as possible. All of our 2025 40-man rosters are updated, and we have projected totals that you can sort on the tax tracker. And that's the other thing to get to. We've got a payroll. We've got a tax tracker. We've got a cash tracker. It's just how baseball does their business. There's not a hard cap. There's not a hard tax. And we still have to keep total cash in mind as well. But for the offseason, if I have to point you in one direction on our site, and really maybe your mindset as well, just stick with the tax stuff. Just stick with the CBT. I wouldn't say it's a hard and fast point of emphasis for teams, but it's the reason Bryce Harper has a 13-year contract. It's the reason we're talking about a 15-year contract for Juan Soto. Okay? It's because while AAV doesn't really overall matter in this league, that CBT salary, most of the time, which is the AAV, does help teams in terms of tax bills and all the sorts of things that go in with that. You know, if you're a basketball fan, you understand this to a certain degree. Okay, now they've got maximum terms in basketball because they got wind of this 3 decades ago and decided to do something about it. Well, baseball hasn't. Okay, baseball's still operating in a 1975 mode. And, you know, the Pujols contracts of the world are still here. And they're still going to come. You know, I would expect Pete to get 8-9 years, Pete Alonso. I would expect Soto, like I said, to be in the 14 to 15 year round. And there'll be a few more above the 7-year mark this offseason. That's why teams are thinking about their tax salary, their tax payroll, the tax threshold, which this year I'm going to look live, and I apologize for not having it, which this year is 241 on the first level. There's 4 tiers above that in terms of, you know, added percentages of tax bills, just like basketball. So that's what to keep in mind. That's why we talk about these things. That's why our algorithm for our valuations spits out long-term contracts more than not. Most of the contracts for major stars are spread out purposefully, and teams understand that the 1 or 2 years at the back end of these contracts are going to be falsified. The player's either going to be retired at that point in time, useless at that point in time, a DH only at that point in time, etc. But it's easier just to have the contract that get the player to say yes and to keep the tax salary low. It's BS. I hope it stops soon. I'd love short contracts. I would kill for Juan Soto to sign something in the 5-year, 50 per year range and then do it all over again at age 30. But it's just not how it works. Number one, nobody wants a $50 million APY on their tax books. And number two, baseball careers are getting shorter and shorter. So if somebody has a 15-year offer on the table for you, you just take it, because getting 15 years of guaranteed amazing money is pretty amazing, right? And it's really tough to turn things over. Now, will baseball eventually go to a max term like basketball? I don't know. We'll see. Probably not, right? Because if you do that, then we start talking about the guaranteed structure and all those things that the players are getting 6-7 years into their career. But that's step one. Options are coming. Option decisions are coming quickly. We've got that tracked, and we will certainly keep you updated on any big news there. The CBT projections are in on Spotrac.com. After that, we'll talk top free agents. We'll talk some top trade candidates. We'll talk some top extension candidates, a lot of which are 22 to 25-year-old players that have barely touched the league, but you can already tell, right? The Gunnar Hendersons of the world. We got our big Bobby Witt Jr. contract last offseason. There's at least a couple of candidates this year to dive in at a young age, and certainly a few that are, you know, in year 3 or year 4 of arbitration that instead of just locking down for 1 year could say, let's go 6 or 7 years right now and take free agency out of it, because as I think you're going to find out, free agency is a bit of a mess in baseball, and it has been for a while. And outside of the Juan Sotos of the world and the Shohei Ohtanis of the world, a lot of players struggle. A lot of agents are struggling now, and that's a topic of conversation for sure. But we'll see. I think the in-season extension, the early extension, are really going to become a bigger thing in this league because of how messy free agency and honestly how messy arbitration has gotten too, in many cases with between team and player. So that's what's coming on Spotrac. I have launched the off-season primers, all 6 of them, every single division, broken up by division. So there's an AL East primer, there's an AL Central primer, there's an NL Central primer, et cetera, all with each team broken down, our projected CBT, payroll, all the arbitration projections we have going, any option decisions coming up, and the notable free agents for every single team going forward, as including, of course, some thoughts from me about where each team stands and where they're headed and how 2024 went, et cetera. So that's now live. All 6 divisions have been broken out live on Spotrac.com. And as I said, we've got plenty more coming because the tables are going to turn here possibly by tomorrow, if you're listening to this on Monday. And if not, certainly by the end of this week, I would think this World Series will be toast and the Juan Soto tour will begin pretty much immediately. So we're on that and plenty more at Spotrac.com. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Spotrac Podcast.